All right, so this is the first video that we're going to be doing together in our flipped classroom. Now, we're going to be doing this now in class. Where in the future, it's going to be more on your own. But until I feel like you guys are ready for that, we're going to stay like this. Now, my goal is hopefully by the end of OELP, when we come back, you guys will be on your own for those. But we're going to see how it goes together as a class. All right, this video is going to be a little bit longer than what they normally will be. And that's because I'm going to be explaining some things that aren't necessarily involved with the content that we're learning, but more about this video. So for instance, what I'm doing right now, this won't be in a normal video, but just kind of telling you what to expect, right? So the first thing with your videos, you will see that you will be given a unit number and letter and a title, right? This is important, and you need to write this down every single time, so that way you can keep track of your notes for each lesson. And when you look, this 3A, just make sure you're paying attention, because this means that we're on our third unit this year. We've done area, we've done volume and solids, and now we're working on to rational and integer numbers. So it's our third unit, and the A means it's our first lesson of that unit. So you'll see 3A, 3B, 3C, and so on. This is not so important now as it is in the future, because when we're doing on your own, you'll see on Edpuzzle videos labeled with this. So this way you just know to do this one first, this one second, this one third. And you can also be looking at the due dates to see which one is labeled or which one's needed first. All right, then the other thing that you'll be given on every video are these learning objectives. Right, this is not something that you are expected to master by the end of the video, but it is something that you need to know how to do either by the time that we take our assessments, or hopefully by the time we finish this section, meaning by the time we finish going over things in class. And these learning objectives are pretty much just giving you a map as to what we're going to learn. So the first thing is understand how to make horizontal and vertical number lines. So it's something that you're going to have to be able to do either on your own or be able to read and interpret them. The next thing is understand how negative and positive numbers can be opposites. So what does that word mean? Well, that's going to be a key term that you'll have to know. Understand how to translate a problem. So if I give you like a word problem or a sentence, how to read that and translate it into an integer. And integers are also a key term that you're going to have to know. And then understand how to plot and move numbers on a number line. All right, so by the end of this video, this is all that you need to know how to do. Okay, in some videos, we will just jump straight into problems, depending on if there's concepts for us to talk about or discuss. And in this video, there are some things I need to discuss with you first. So the problems that we're going to work on together at the very end. And right now, we're just going to go over the concepts and go over the some definitions. All right, so the first thing is if I give you number lines. So this is our first number line that we're going to work on. If I give you this number line and I ask you to plot the number 8 and any number after 8. Well, the first way that you can start with this is you could start by writing 8 at this first number, at this first tick mark, and we can then just increase in order as we go. So hopefully you guys all know how to plot on a number line by now. And if not, it's fine. It's something that we will be working on now and together. But we can plot these numbers, and you could have started with your first tick mark being 8, and you could have gone ahead and worked your way to the right, knowing that as we move to the right, our values are increasing. All right, so we see here they're all being +1 as we move to the right. Well, another way you could have plotted this 8 is you could have put it somewhere in the middle. You didn't have to pick the very first one. We could have picked and said, well, 8 could be here. So 8 will be 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. But now we still have these last 3 digits that we need to plot. So we'd have to ask ourselves, well, how do we plot these? Well, if all of these, and it's a number line, and they're going to be going in order, what we could be asking ourselves then is what number would be before 8? Well, that would be 7, and 6, and 5. So we have learned now a different thing that we can do. As we are moving to the right, we were adding 1. And what are we doing as we are moving to the left? We are subtracting 1. Right? So that can now help us if we were to go ahead and plot this with 0 directly in the middle. And I ask you to go ahead and plot these values now for me to the left, right? So now from here we can say, all right, well, would be the number before 0. Now, this is where it could be tricky because some of you may not have seen negative numbers before. But what it is our next number, it is actually symmetrical to the values that we have here. So it's going to look very similar in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But the difference is now these values are negative. So it becomes -1, -2, -3, -4, and -5. So what we need to look for and account for is if we were to draw a line directly down this number line at 0, that our graph is symmetrical, meaning that the numbers fall in the exact same order, except for on one side they are positive numbers, and on the other side they are negative numbers. And we're going to talk about in a second about what those definitions would be. All right, but if you see, -3 is 1, 2, 3 spots away from 0, and +3 is 1, 2, 3 spots away from 0. So that's what I mean by they're symmetrical. All right, so some of the things that we need to know for this is as we move to the right in our horizontal number line, we are increasing in value. And as we move to the left in our horizontal number line, we are decreasing in value. Right? These are key things that you must know in regards to your number line. All right, so now the next type of number line that we can actually have is a vertical number line. And you guys, even though you may not realize it, you should be very familiar with these because it's essentially like when you go into a building and you go into the elevator, you're starting from a specific floor and that elevator is moving you up or down. So we can think about that building as a vertical number line. And so let's say you start and you walk in at the 0th floor, at the ground floor. And we say, well, how many buildings or how many floors do we have? Well, we should know that as we move up our stairs or in our elevator, our values are increasing. So we should be able to fill in this number line going in the vertical direction. So in this case, as we move up, it is going to be increasing in value. And we already have all been acclimated to this if we think about it in terms of a building. And when we move into the elevator, we know going up, our floors are increasing. And that's how we can think about this. Well, now, just like before with the horizontal, what if instead of that 0 starting at the very bottom, when we walk into the ground floor, that we have a few basements that we can go into, some floors below us. And in some of the malls that we go into here, they do have lower level floors. So this is something that we should also know what is happening. So we can easily fill in the numbers above. But now let's think about what we did with the horizontal number line. The vertical number line is exactly the same, meaning it is symmetrical. So it's going to go in the same order, 1, 2, and 3. But now when we're going below 0, it is going to be negative. So we see, if I were to highlight this 2, it is 2 spaces or 2 units away from 0. And this -2 is also 2 units away from 0. So we just need to make sure that even in our vertical number line, our number lines are symmetrical. And then the rules that we have to know is that as we move up, we're increasing in value. So as we're going up in our elevator, our floors are increasing. And as we move down, we are decreasing in value. Right? So those are the rules that you need to know for a vertical number line. But one of the key things is symmetrical. All right? Our number lines are symmetrical. All right? But when we move to the left or below 0, it becomes negative. And as we move greater than 0 or above, it is positive. All right, so anytime you're given key terms, you do have to write them down. So please make sure you are writing these down in your notebook. And then when I do talk about them, and if I write anything on the screen, make sure you're writing down the important information. So positive numbers are numbers that are greater than 0. And they can be written with or without this plus sign. So if I say +5, I can write 5, or I can write +5 if I want to. Typically, if we're writing the number out, depending on if there's anything before it or not, we will just write, if I say 8, we will just write the 8. But if you wrote +8, that works as well. And it's something that is needed in an expression later on that we will be doing. But we can write 20 if it's positive as +20, or as positive 20 with the sign. Right? Now with negative numbers, these are any numbers that are less than 0. So they're less than 0, and they must be written with this sign. So if I say give me -8, you must write it as -8. And why can't I write it as just this 8 here? And the reason is, if we just write it with the 8, we think it's positive. So we have to write it with the negative sign. So -135 is -135. -48, -48. All right, so negative numbers are less than 0. So on our number line, if this is 0, all of our negative numbers will fall to the left, as we talked about, and all of our positive numbers will fall to the right. But when we write positive, we don't have to write it with the sign, but when we write negative, we do. All right, now the last things that we're going to talk about before we get into some examples are these two key terms, opposites and integers. All right, first let's talk about the opposites, because we kind of already talked about this before, but we just didn't give it its specific name. So two numbers that are the same distance from 0 on a number line, but are on opposite sides of the 0, they are called opposites. So before, we were highlighting specific numbers and counting their spaces. Well, if we look at this +4, it is 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0, and -4 is 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0 as well. So 4 and -4 are opposites. So are 8 and -8. But 4 and 4, even though both of these are 4 units away from 0, they are not opposites because they are on the same side. All right, and the last definition before we move into any examples is this integers. And all integers are, is you guys should have learned what whole numbers are. And now whole numbers are or integers are all the whole numbers. Now we're including their opposites. So it's going to give us positive and negative numbers. So in this case, it would be -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and to infinity in both directions. Any of these numbers are considered integers. But if we were to say 3.5, that is not considered an integer because it is not a whole number. And integers are all whole numbers plus their opposites. All right? And then the last thing, let's make sure I didn't say this, but the opposite of 0 is 0. So if I ask you what is the opposite of 0, that is just itself going to be 0. All right, now we're going to move into some examples. I know that this video is a little bit long, and it's longer than what it normally would be, but there's some things that I wouldn't have said before, like some time I would have wasted explaining what we're doing in this video. All right, all examples must be written down, and I know in this case when it's a lot of words, it could be a little tedious, but you do have to write down all examples because in class it gives you something to refer back to. We can refer back to our notes and our examples. All right, so write a positive or negative integer that represents each situation. So in this case, it says a contestant gains 250 points on the game show. Well, if they gain 250 points, they earn 250 points. That means that it increased. And whenever we increase, that means it is greater than 0. So that means it is positive. So we can write it as positive 250 or just 250. All right, the next one says gasoline freezes at 40 degrees below 0. Below. So that means that it is less than 0, which then means it has to be negative. So we must write this as -40. We cannot just write 40 because that is implying that it is positive. So it would just be -40. All right, so that is the first thing that we were supposed to be able to do, is be able to identify how to write our integers when given a scenario. All right, now the next example, let's call this example 2, that you guys must be able to do, is to graph an integer and its opposite. So in this case, I'm asking you to graph this -2. That is an integer. So now if we want to plot its opposite, what we need to do is figure out the value that is exactly the same distance away from -2. So we can count this units if we would like. That's 2 units away. And then from the other direction, I can move 2 units and say, okay, here's my opposite then, because that is the same distance away from -2. Or hopefully once we get familiar with this, we know that the positive and negative of the same value, so 2, that is going to be its opposite. So negative and positive 2. All right, so now this is our last example that we're going to go through, example 3. You deliver flowers to an office building. You enter at ground level and go down 2 floors to make the first delivery. So let's just go ahead and underline some of this important information. We're entering at ground floor. We're going down 2 floors. Then we go up 7 floors to make the second delivery. Write an integer that represents each position. So when we say each position, that means each thing that happened. So our first thing is we walked in at the ground level. Well, what integer, what value can represent ground level? Well, we haven't moved up or down at that point, so our value would be considered 0. Let me make this colon instead. So that would be 0. The next thing is we went down 2 floors. Well, how do we represent going down? Well, when we're going down, that means that we're moving less than 0, and that means we're decreasing. So we can represent this by an integer of -2 because we went down 2 floors. And then if we go up 7 floors, how do we represent this as an integer? Well, when we go up, we know that we are increasing. That means it's going to be positive. So we can just write 7, or you could write +7 if you'd like. All right, now from this, for question B, it says, write an integer that represents how you can return to ground level. So now after we did all these deliveries, if we wanted to say, well, what do we need to do in order to go back to ground level? That's what it's asking for. So the first thing is we can fill in, well, we started at the ground floor. And it said that we moved down 2 floors. So here we went down 1, 2. That means that we were at this floor here. And then it said from there we moved up 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 floors. So now that is the floor that we are on. So now if we want to go back down to our ground floor, how do we go from 5 to our ground floor 0? Well, we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And since we moved down, we know that we are decreasing. That means it is a negative value. So our integer would be -5. So -5 would take us back down to the ground floor. All right, that is it for this video.